Welcome back to the 4D Side Podcast. I am Victor Ciccarelli, and today we have the amazing David Julian McClements in the house with us, and we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, food. Hey, Doc, welcome. It's good to have you on board. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, fantastic having me on. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to
Okay,
it.
so let me do this for the people who give a little context. You are a distinguished professor at the University of Massachusetts, and you have spent your entire career learning how food works. Not just what's in it, but how it's designed, how it behaves, how it lasts longer, and how the science is reshaping what ends up on our plates every day. You've
Yep.
written 11 books and 17 scientific papers, which frankly is a number I can't even get my head around how anyone can write 1,700 scientific papers. And what fascinates me most about talking to you is like you sit right on that edge between technology, chemist, science, and cook.
Yep.
Does that kind
Although it
of
sort of does, but I'm a terrible cook. And if it was up to me, I would stick everything in the microwave. But luckily, my wife's a fantastic cook. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Doc, how did you get here? I mean, at what point in your life did you wake up and say, I want to study food?
I think it probably started like I think it was 1969 when I was sat on the couch with my uncle watching the first space landing on the moon. So
Uh,
yeah, and I was just blown away by it. I was so excited about
uh,
it, and the science behind it. And my uncle became a food technologist. So I love science, and I wanted to do something practical. So I went to the University of Leeds in England and studied food science, and I absolutely loved it. And I've done it for 40 years now, and I've never got bored. There's always something interesting around foods.
I remember the space landings. I was just sitting in, I think, my second grade classroom watching the old black and white TV rolled out on the cart. Things the kids today don't quite understand anymore.
Yeah.
So tell me, what is the day like for a food scientist? What like do you work in a lab? Do you what's your day?
Yeah, it's a real mixture of things. I think personally, I spend most of my time writing, and that's why I can produce so many books and papers. And but my students are in the lab probably every day, like working on different projects. So I think we do a lot of projects on plant-based foods and how to make them, more healthy and sustainable. But we work on all sorts of different things like food nanotechnology and food sustainability and things like, how to redesign processed foods to make them healthier for you.
Well, if I could unpack what you just said. There's about 20 questions that just came out. But let's talk
Yeah.
about your students. What kind of cool projects? You say they work on projects. What kind of things are they doing? What is it?
Yeah, so we have, some people working on things called delivery systems. So these are where we're trying to fortify foods with vitamins or things called nutraceuticals, which are like a cross between nutrients and pharmaceuticals. So they're components that you find in food that are actually beneficial for your health. So they may help prevent heart disease, or they may help prevent cancer or diabetes or something like that. But if you put them in foods, they often don't get absorbed by your body. So we're using nanotechnology to try and increase the amount that gets absorbed to your body so they have more beneficial effects. So that's sort of one group of projects. That's all what's called encapsulation and delivery systems. And then we have another group where we're looking at plant-based foods. So we're trying to make, use plant proteins and other plant ingredients to create things like meat analogs or egg analogs or milk analogs or fish analogs. So something that looks and tastes exactly like, a real fish or a real egg, but it's all made from plant-based ingredients.
So why are you trying to take away my meat? What's the reasoning behind all of this push to? I like my hamburgers. I do.
Okay. Yeah, well, I grew up in England and I love roast beef. So my granny would cook me roast beef and Yorkshire pudding every Sunday. And that was my favorite meal. I used to love the good meat pies, like steak and kidney pie and stuff like that. But like for me, what happened is like probably, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, my daughter became a vegetarian. She did a class at school and she came home and she was like horrified about how all the animals are treated, to create meat. And, like the whole family became vegetarian because we thought we're not cooking two meals, like let's support our daughter in this. And as part of that, I sort of changed my research a little bit. And I wrote a book called Future Foods. And as part of that, I was looking at, how the food industry impacts the environment. And meat has a huge impact on the environment. So it really contributes to greenhouse gas emissions and pollution and land use and the biodiversity loss. So I thought, yeah, this is a really important area to research. So I devoted a lot of my time to doing research in that area.
So I got to ask a personal question. I know nothing about the subject other than I eat.
Yeah.
I have always been under the belief that we're supposed to eat meat. Meat is part of our lives, but the processed stuff that you buy at Walmart probably isn't the best version of meat that you can eat. And for me, there's always been a distinction between no, I think we should eat meat, and that processed stuff goes through a lot. How does that fit in your reality? I mean, is that a true statement?
Yeah, and I think if you look at our biology, I think we are omnivores, and I think, we've, evolved millions of years ago to eat a really broad range of different foods just to survive. So I think, like we can have meat as part of our diet, but I think if we keep eating as much meat as we eat now, there's not going to be enough room in the planet to sort of grow all the animals that we need for meat. So we're going to destroy all the national parks and all these other parts of the world trying to feed us meat. So I think what we're trying to do is create an alternative to meat that looks exactly like meat. So it looks like meat, it tastes like meat, has the same nutritional profile as meat. You couldn't tell the difference between this product and meat, but this product is 10 times more sustainable. It could be designed to be better for your health, and it tastes exactly the same, and it's cheaper. So why wouldn't you buy it? I mean, that's not true now, but that's our goal.
Well, I think growing up in my generation, I know when I was a kid, I had an uncle way back in the 70s who was vegetarian. And, he cooked some foods that were just hard. I mean, that stuff was
Yeah.
that I'll never forget. He made an apple pie that was just absolutely inedible. So whenever I hear the, don't eat meat, I'm hearing the 1960s and 70s hippie talk about, what I hear you saying is there's a difference here. We're not talking about meat, we're talking about a sustainable food source that can feed a growing planet. Is
Yeah, I
that
think I think you're right. I think it sounds like your uncle is a terrible cook. I mean, I think I mean, apple
he
pie.
was?
If you shouldn't have meat in apple pie anyway. So I don't know if that's a strong argument. But yeah, I think you're right. I think I mean that's what we're trying to do is make a more sustainable, food system. Um, and if we can, but I think, over 90% of people in America eat meat. So I think if we can make fantastic vegetarian foods for the vegetarians, and it's not going to make a difference. What we need to do is make foods that meat eaters want to eat, so that they reduce the amount of meat they eat. You don't have to stop eating meat, but you have it, once or twice a week, which is what, like decades ago, that's what our grandparents would do. They didn't have it for every meal; they had it occasionally. And I think we want to get back to that kind of situation where we don't have to have these factory farms to grow, to raise cattle. We can have them out in the fields, like in northern England, where I come from. You walk around the farms, and they're beautiful farms with green grass, where you've got cows on there which live a relatively nice life before they kill. But you go to some of these sort of concentrated animal feeding centers and slaughterhouses, and that's a horrible life for these animals. So if we can move away from that, this is one element to do it, is have these really high quality plant-based foods.
Are we there? Are we getting close? I mean, my partner cooks some meat alternatives for me, and some of them are really good. There's a few that, like, if you didn't tell me the difference, I wouldn't know. But there are some of them that are just horrible.
Yeah, and I think, that's changed a lot. I first tried to become a vegetarian in probably like the 1980s when I was doing a course in food science. We had somebody from the meat industry came in, and they showed us all pictures of like how they, basically create a beef burger. And they went through all the different steps from taking the animal from the field into these, chopping it up and stuff. And that put me off. But the food was so bad, the vegetarian food at the time, it was really hard to stick to that diet. But I think now it's gone much better. I mean, you've got companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat who are making really good quality sort of plant-based burgers and nuggets and other kind of products that you can incorporate into your diet as a substitute for meat products. I think the problem is we haven't got like a good plant-based beef joint or a pork chop or a chicken breast. So, those kind of products we still haven't been able to mimic properly.
How
And I
far
think
are
at
we?
I would say 5 or 10 years,
This
to get those kind of products. We're making really great progress. There was a big study done recently that showed that some of the products, like the nuggets, they're about the same acceptance as an animal nugget. So if you went out about a plant-based one and just swap that out, you probably couldn't tell the difference, and you would like it just as much. And then you'd have a big impact on sustainability by doing that without having to change your lifestyle or how much you enjoyed your foods or anything. But it's much, much more challenging to do some of these whole cut meats to try and make them taste comparable and at the same cost as real meat.
how do you make? I know I'm asking a complex question, but how do you make meat out of plant? I mean, what's the process? What do you do?
Yeah, well, first of all, I should say it's really complicated. And just to give you an idea how complicated it is, imagine you were trying to make a tomato out of beef, or you were trying to make a cucumber out of egg. Like where would you start? It'd be almost impossible to do. So the fact that companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods have got these products is quite incredible. So basically, what you do is you have to take all these different plant-based ingredients and you have to assemble them into structures that make like fibers, like the fibers that you get in meat. And you have to make them sort of have the same kind of structure as meat, which is very, very complicated because meat is, if you look at your muscles, it's a very complicated structure. And then you have to have the same texture and the same taste and the same appearance and the same breakdown in the mouth. And then you have to have the same nutritional profile. And you can do that in lots of different ways. We use in our labs something called soft matter physics, which is where you look at the molecules and you try and assemble them into certain structures. But companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods use things called like extrusion, which is like a great big machine that mixes everything together and heats it, and then it can like sort of create these fibrous structures.
One of the things that the vegetarians have us conditioned to understand is natural good, chemical bad. And yet, when I read the product labels on plant-based meat, it's chemical, 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 chemical. How do we reconcile that? How do you tell me that natural good, chemical bad, and then feed me a bunch of chemicals?
No, I agree. I think this whole ultra processed food area is become really popular in the media, and I think there's a big pushback against processed food. And I think a lot of the plant-based foods are highly processed foods. I think they're made from lots of different ingredients. Some of them are, most of them are natural ingredients. So even though it's a whole list of chemicals, a lot of them come from like, different types of plants like soybeans or coconuts or nuts or cereals and things like that. And I think the companies are really trying to make their labels a lot cleaner. So they're trying to reduce the number of ingredients and they're trying to replace ones that might have adverse health effects with healthy ones. And there's been some studies done, like Stanford did a study where they compared like regular beef burgers with plant-based beef burgers. And they did some clinical trials where they fed them to people for a week. And then they looked at all sort of markers of their health. And they found that if you ate the plant-based burger, it was actually better for your health, in terms of like your heart disease and markers and things like that. So I think for me, I think you've got to judge a product on its health effects rather than on its composition and its processing.
As a general consumer who knows nothing about this, how do I know what's good and what's bad? I mean, are we at the point yet where I can walk into a store and if it says plant-based meat, I can eat it and not worry?
Yeah. I think, for all consumers, we really want to be able to read labels. I think to understand, which foods to buy and which processed foods to buy and which ones not to buy. And it's things like, how much calories it's got in, how much salt, sugar, and fat it's got in. I think they're probably the most important things. I think generally, good advice would be eat whole foods like fresh fruits and vegetables, nuts, cereals, cook at home. But most of us haven't got the time to do that or the energy or the inclination. I don't like cooking, so I just wouldn't do that myself. So I think what my argument is, we need to make better processed foods. We need to make them healthier and more sustainable, but also make them taste good and be convenient and affordable.
So what really cool things are coming out that we don't know about yet? I mean, I'm a lifetime Star Trek fan. I want to walk up to my replicator, push the button, and have it make my food. So I'm taking it we're not there yet.
We're almost there. It was actually I was actually probably, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I got a phone call from this guy in Boston, and he was like a mathematical complexity theorist. And he was setting up this meeting in Boston, and he invited a whole group of scientists. It was like the commander of the International Space Station. There was a molecular gastronomy TV chef. There was some engineers and some food scientists. And they were trying to make the Star Trek replicator. So they wanted to make something that would go on a spaceship that you could just type in and it would produce what any food you wanted. And at the time, to me, that seemed like an absolutely crazy idea. And what they were trying to do was maybe doing 3D food printers. And I thought that's never going to work. And then, maybe 10 years later, there's like a restaurant in London where they 3D print all the chairs, they 3D print the cutlery, they 3D print all the food. So on the menu, you can choose something on the menu, they'll 3D print it for you. So in my lab, we're actually doing 3D printing now. So we're 3D printing meat. So we make edible inks out of sort of plant proteins and put natural colors in, and we can like 3D print some bacon or a roast beef or something like that.
And is it working?
We're just doing a very preliminary stage. There is a company in Israel that is producing 3D printed roast beef, and it's actually supposed to be a really good product.
You've just made my entire day. That is,
Yeah,
you've made my fantasies come true. That is awesome.
yeah, it's
So
really cool.
I
I
take
mean,
it. Oh no, please.
yeah,
Go
no,
ahead.
yeah, it's really cool. I mean, the commander of the space station was saying, like, eating is so important to your life. And he said, like, all astronauts, when they're out, like 6 months or, you've got a few years mission to Mars or, and back or something, that if you don't have good food, you get really depressed. And so at the moment, it's just all this horrible mush that they eat. And if you don't get that beautiful sensory experience you get from eating. So he's saying if you can have this 3D printed food and you can choose, your favorite meal, which might be different for every person, then, that makes you more excited and engaged in what you're doing on the spaceship.
So if you could go back and talk to that younger you sitting on the couch, you got your dream. You actually are working on space foods.
Yeah, well, I actually did a project with NASA where we were doing projects on stabilizing vitamins because, like, if you want to do a Mars mission, you have to go from the Earth to Mars and back again, and it might take a couple of years to do it. So you put all the foods on the spaceship when you leave Earth, but by the time they get to Mars, maybe all the vitamins and minerals have chemically degraded, so that they don't
Mm.
have the impact that you want. So you could lose muscle, get muscle wasting or bone wasting or something. So we were trying to work on a project on how do you stabilize the vitamin minerals so they don't degrade during spaceflight. So we actually did work with NASA, which was really, really cool. Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
I'd ask what I mean. Wow, you're the idea that we're going to actually be able to 3D print our food. I mean, I work in 3D printers. I do a lot of that kind of stuff. So the idea that that's actually working. I mean, we've had chocolate printers and pancake printers for a while, but actual meat printers.
Yeah,
What
we're
is,
trying to make like you were trying to make different kinds of edible inks. I mean, that's a really challenging thing. It's like, how do you make something that can go through a tiny nozzle that can set
Mhm.
on a printing platform and then, it's going to be the right texture and appearance and the right nutritional profile. So that's the kind of things we're working on at the moment is formulating different kinds of edible inks for different types of foods.
Slightly changing the subject because I keep talking about future foods for a while. Is this stuff healthier for us? Is it healthier than eating all natural foods, or is it the right answer because we have to feed a huge population?
A bit of both, I think. I mean, I think if we could, it'd be better to eat all natural foods. I mean, well, you still have to process natural foods to make sure that they're safe and healthy. You can have pesticides on there, or you can have fertilizers, or you can have mercury in fish and stuff like that. And you can have things called anti-nutrients, which are things that can affect the absorption of vitamins and minerals and protein. So we do need to process foods to make them safe and healthy. But we don't want to process them because if you do process them too much, you can change the way they behave in your gastrointestinal tract. So they may get digested too quickly and you get spikes in glucose in your bloodstream, and that can lead to things like diabetes. So I think what we're trying to do is, like, can we use science to understand how processed foods behave in your body so that we can actually design them to be healthy?
That I don't even know what to ask you next. You've blown my mind. What questions should I be asking you right now? Because I'm still stuck on the 3D printing of food. I get my replicator. I'm good.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Like, what I suppose, what would food look like in 2050? I
What
mean, I
will
think
it
that'd
look
be a
like in
question.
20? Yeah, seriously.
I have no clue. I mean, it could look exactly the same, but be much healthier for us, or it could be radically different. So, like, we were trying to make on a project on, at the moment, people make things like, if you're a vegetarian, you can have things like tofu or tempeh and seitan and stuff like that, or you can eat meat analogs like a burger or something. So we were trying to create a whole new series of products that doesn't exist. So can you make like a blue pyramid or like a yellow lemon sphere or a crunchy red square or something like that, which are full of
Ugh.
proteins and stuff like that. So almost
19,
like
1970s sci-fi food.
yeah, like Jetsons,
Yeah.
like can we make something like, and will people actually accept this food? So we can make it, but if nobody's going to eat it, it's no good. But, in principle, you can do anything with food and make, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. You can make food that moves across your plate, or stuff. I think the other really exciting area is, not using plant-based foods, is using the lab-grown meat food, so cultured
Mhm.
meat. So, and this is, really one of the hot topics in the food science area at the moment is how do you grow meat in a big bioreactor? So this is like, producing alcohol, but instead of producing alcohol through fermentation, you produce meat. So you'd have like meateries instead of having sort of small breweries. And I don't know if you know that technology, you take like a cell from a living animal, you can put it into this bioreactor and just grow lots and lots of cells and then you can like form that into a meat product, and you've never killed an animal. You've just grown meat in the well, not really in a lab, like in a factory.
That's weird.
Again, yeah, that's much more. It's much
See,
more sustainable. And there's a company in California, Upside Foods, who's actually making products now, and people can buy them in selected restaurants. They're selling them in Singapore as well. So I think that could be the future of meat as well. Is like actually growing it in a big stainless steel tank rather than growing it in an animal.
I don't know if it's outside of your purview. What's the consumer acceptance of this stuff? Is it working? Are you fighting for it? What's the I know you produce it, but on the sales side, is it working?
I think people have done surveys of consumers, especially like younger consumers, are willing to try it. I think it's something like 40% of people are actually think, oh yeah, I would try that. And I think probably the more it got accepted, and it became mainstream food, probably more people would adopt it. And I think again because there's no animals being killed, so it's much better, and it's just much more sustainable. And it's probably it increases the security of the food system. So if
Mhm.
you're not going to get things like bird flu, or swine fever or mad cow's disease. So some of these diseases that can just wipe out all the animals and have a huge economic effect. You don't, they're not a worry anymore.
Have you ever looked into what the price point is going to be when it gets to full production? I mean, when things are new, they're always more expensive, but when it ramps up and it becomes equal production, how the price is going to compare with what we're paying for food now?
Yeah, I think if you look at like when their first burger that they produced using this technology cost $300,000, and that was in. So it's probably a little bit more expensive than most people would be willing to pay. And that was like in 2008, but now they've got it down to maybe it's like 2 or 3 times more expensive than meat. So that's a huge improvement over the last sort of 15, 20 years. So I think it is going in the right direction. And I think um, they still need to scale up and they need to get more people to buy it. But I think maybe it'll become price competitive in the future.
As production scales up, prices go down. So that's going to
Yeah.
be that.
So again, I think you'd be thinking like 10, 10 years or something like that.
So when do I get my 3D printer making my burgers at home? I'm sorry, I'm fascinated with that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean
So
that's what our idea was. It's like, can you just like you have an app at home and you're sat at work and you think like, oh, what am I going to eat today? And you just have, I'm going to have roast beef Yorkshire pudding, but a plant-based one. And you just tap it into your phone, and then while you're driving home, the 3D printer's in your kitchen, and it's almost like like one of these coffee makers where you get the pods. You just put different inks
that,
in there, and it would just sort of 3D print whatever you wanted to. You just get home, you stick it in the microwave, or it even cooks it inside the 3D printer. So I think that's the ultimate aim. Whether that's achievable or not, I don't know. But it's if you don't go for it, it's not going to happen.
in my heart, it's achievable. I may not see it in my lifetime, but it is going to happen. Okay, so you have 11 books. Anything I would understand? Or are they all like, science journals that would be so far over my head I wouldn't get it?
I think my first few books have all been textbooks, so like nanotechnology and polymers and
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah,
But I think
blah,
with my
blah, blah,
recent,
blah, blah. I wouldn't
yeah,
understand a word
exactly.
enough. Right.
But my recent books, I've been written one called Future Foods, which is written for a more general audience, which talks about all the sort of exciting advances that are going on in food science. I did one called Meatless, which is like all the arguments behind like why we need to move away from sort of meat products, or at least partly move away from meat products. And I've just finished one recently called Ultra Processed Foods. That is like looking at the science behind ultra processed foods and are they really bad for you as people think they are, or are all of these foods bad?
I'm going to ask you the two questions from that, which is what is the biggest argument for moving past meat-based foods? So why should I give up my burgers? What's in it?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different reasons. I think it depends on the person. I think, one of them is environment and sustainability. We can't keep producing meat the way we are. The global population is going to be 10 billion people by 2050. So we have to feed another 3 billion people. People are getting richer, like in India and China and other places in the world, like a lot of Asia and Africa. People get more money, and as they do, they switch from a plant-based diet to a meat-based diet. So
Cheers.
they're going to want to eat more meat. So meat production is climbing all the time, and it's having really terrible environmental effects. It's as I said before, it's causing greenhouse gas emissions and pollution and land use, and what it's all getting used up. Fresh water is getting used up. It increases the risk of zoonotic diseases like COVID, because we often get these diseases from animals. We have to use a lot of antibiotics to treat animals, and that's leading to antibiotic resistance. So all of these are like really major problems for the future generations. So I think we don't have to give up meat, but if we don't, we're going to face some serious consequences. So I think that's one reason. Ethical reasons, there's like 70 billion animals killed every year. So, and they're often kept in really horrible conditions. So if you really care about animals, that's another reason you might do it. And health reasons, there's some kinds of meat products, like especially highly processed meat products, that can have adverse health effects. So we can actually design them to be healthier for you.
Health. Is it better? We've lived through the same thing. How many things have they told us were going to be healthy for us that weren't, or drugs that were going to save us that ended up causing problems? As a consumer, it gets kind of hard to listen to the hype of technologies because we've lived through so many false starts. How can I
I
trust
completely,
this one?
yeah, I completely agree. I think, I mean, I'm a physical chemist who does food science, and I look at all the nutrition science, and it's incredibly complicated, and they're changing their advice all the time. So I find it really confusing. Even when I, write books on it, I find it very confusing. And you get completely contradictory messages. So like saturated fats are bad for you, then they're good for you. Red meat's bad for you, then it's good for you. So I think, and it's not surprising it's complicated. Like foods are incredibly complicated. The human body is incredibly complicated. We're all different from each other. We all have different microbiomes, so we have different bacteria living in our guts, which process the food differently. So it's not surprising it's very, very complicated. And the advice is really complicated. But it is really difficult for consumers, I think. So I think all we can do is try and make the best decisions on the knowledge that we have at the moment, and be cautious about what knowledge. Don't over promise things.
It sounds like you found yourself in quite the fascinating career.
I love it. I absolutely love it. There's like always something interesting going on, and it affects every aspect of your life. We all eat all the time. It affects your pleasure. So we've worked on things like Willy Wonka foods, like trying to make foods that change taste as you eat them. So like we use these encapsulation technologies. So like in Willy Wonka, it might go from like a roast beef dinner to I don't know, like a strawberry shortcake. So we can put flavors in there so that you get one flavor released first and then another flavor released later. So again, it's just like all the stuff you can work on is just really, really fascinating.
And we only have to be careful when we get to the pie at the end because that has a bad, yeah. No,
Well, I
never
don't know.
ended.
Well, obesity is growing so fast in America. I think a lot of people have been taking that pie. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're a professor. You're actively teaching. You're working with the next generation of you. How do you feel?
Yeah.
How is that planting those seeds for tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a fantastic part of my job is that you're working with sort of young excited students all the time, and they're really passionate about what they're doing, and it makes me feel younger just talking to them and being around all the students all the time. So I get older every year, and the students stay the same age. So that's a bit disconcerting, but
Yeah,
apart
I
from
know that
that,
feeling. It
yeah,
happens
yeah,
to us, doesn't it?
it does, it does.
Oh, so as we're coming towards the end of our time, I could go on forever. I mean, it's like my mind's blown. What questions didn't I ask you that I should have?
Oh, let's see. What did you not ask? I don't know really.
Uh,
Um,
it means we did our job well. We covered the topic.
yeah, no, it's been really cool. I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, a lot of fun.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Dr. Julian McClements. It's been David Julian McClements. It's been an absolute honor having you on. I hope you come back with us again sometime.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, again, as I said, it's lots and lots of fun.
Okay. This has been the 40 Side Podcast. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you again next week.